The big news this morning is the US attacks on Venezuela, the forcible removal of President Nicolas Maduro and his wife. They're currently on a US warship heading to New York to face criminal charges. These are the live scenes right now outside the White House in the US capital, Washington, D.C. A handful of protesters turning out. This is certainly one invasion that's kind of divided international opinion. Global leaders quite muted in their response for now. More coverage just ahead.
When black people are under attack, what do we do? Stand up, fight back! Say, what do we do? Stand up, fight back! Say, what do we do? Stand up,
You said the United States is not occupying Venezuela. So how is the United States going to run Venezuela? Like the president said repeatedly, saying that the United States is in charge of Venezuela. And how much is this going to cost the United States taxpayers in terms of dollars and troops?
Look, some of these things were discussed in the SCIF. I want to say that the way that this is being described, I think, is accurate. This is not a regime change. This is a demand for change of behavior by a regime. The interim government is stood up now, and we are hopeful that they will be able to correct their action. They cannot participate with narco-terrorists and very dangerous international criminal organizations that harm and target Americans, frankly, and traffic all of these dangerous drugs into our country, that do all this great harm to our country. They cannot continue that activity. We have a way of persuasion, because their oil exports, as you know, have been ceased, and I think that will bring the country to a new governance in very short order. So we don't expect troops on the ground. We don't expect direct involvement in any other way beyond just coercing the interim government to get that going. Look, I expect that there will be an election called in Venezuela. I mean, some of these things are still being determined, of course. But it should happen in short order, and I think it will need to be so that their economy can remain stabilized and the country can remain stabilized.
So when you say interim government, did the briefers indicate that they want members of the current regime to stay in power, for instance, Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, or did they specify that they want a change in leadership?
Look, this is still developing right now, obviously. This has all just happened within the last couple of days, and so there are more questions ultimately about how it resolves probably than answers at the moment, but that's to be expected. We took out a serious threat. We removed a serious threat in terms of an arrest, an indictment, then an arrest, and now bringing to justice, again, in America, on our soil, of someone who is doing great harm to our country. And we need the country of Venezuela now. The people cheering in the streets, elated by this outcome, as you've seen. They now can have that freedom in Venezuela again. They have vast natural resources, as you know, and if they act accordingly and as a good partner in our hemisphere, they will have a very bright future, and we're all very hopeful for that. I know the people of Florida in particular who feel this so acutely have been having parties in the streets because they know what this means. And there were Floridians in the briefing here, most notably the Secretary of State, who understands these issues and those dynamics as well as anyone. Look, I can tell you, as Speaker of the House, as a person who's in charge of defending Article I powers, I'm just going to insist to you that those have not been traversed in any way by what happened here. The President used his authority under the law. He did so in a way that caused no casualties on the American side and got the job done with exquisite intelligence and extreme precision that can only be done by the U.S. That's why we are the world's great and last superpower, and we stand for justice, and you're going to see that meted out here. It's overdue, and everyone will be safer because this has happened. So stay tuned for the further developments.
That's the US House Speaker Mike Johnson leaving that press conference there on Capitol Hill, defending the decision by the Trump administration not to brief the so-called Gang of Eight, the top Republicans and Democrats in Congress prior to the US military action.
Events are moving fast in Venezuela and around the world in the wake of U.S. President Donald Trump's move to unseat the dictator Nicolas Maduro from power in Caracas, not only striking a blow for human rights and against the drug trade, but also reasserting America's long-held right to tell Russia and China that they have no business interfering in the Western Hemisphere. Soon I'll be joined by a former Colombian ambassador to the U.S. whose own country, under new left-wing governance, I should make clear, is also now in the White House's sights. But before we get to that, we also need to have a deep dive into the reactions to Trump's strike and why so many of these so-called peace protesters who suddenly, spontaneously appeared on the streets with suspiciously pre-printed placards are not really on the side of peace or the Venezuelan people at all. Instead, they are what the late Vladimir Lenin famously called a century ago, useful idiots. I mean, just look at some of these people. Here are some protesters in Portland, Oregon, just furious that Nicolas Maduro has been deposed. Straight out of central casting. Meanwhile, in Mexico City, this chap decided to take out his anger on Maduro's behalf by chucking eggs at the American embassy. You know, thanks to Maduro's, it probably would have taken your average Venezuelan 3 weeks to buy that many eggs. Oh, and look at this from where else? Seattle, Washington.
Hands off Venezuela! Hands off Venezuela! Hands off Venezuela! Hands off Venezuela! Free President Maduro! Free President Maduro! La lucha sigue! La lucha sigue! Libertad, socialismo o muerte! Venceremos!
Yep, that's your American left in a nutshell right there. A dude in a skirt yelling in defense of an anti-American narco-terrorist drug dealer. What did I say before about useful idiots? Anyway, for my money, I'd much rather hear from actual Venezuelans, particularly the 8 million, yes, 8 million Venezuelans who have fled the regime of Nicolas Maduro, successor to Hugo Chavez, and who never thought they would see the day their oppressor was gone. Venezuelans like this woman in Miami, Florida, home to a huge Venezuelan population.
Muy emocionada llorando. ¿Cómo se siente? Cuéntanos por qué llora.
Felicidad, tantos años esperar esto, Señor. Gracias, Señor. Ay, Dios mío, esta es una alegría inmensa. Gracias, Señor. Gracias al presidente de Estados Unidos.
I also like these Venezuelan exiles who even saw fit to fire up a little YMCA in honor of Trump. And these exiles aren't fans of the communist sympathizers in the West who stick up for the regime that brutalized them for so long. Check out the reaction to this woman who tried to say a word in favor of Maduro at a Venezuelan rally in Spain.
¡Viva Chávez! ¡Viva Maduro!
And back to the useful idiots, well, this pro-Maduro type has no clue, apparently, what he's protesting about or what to say when confronted with evidence of Maduro's brutality.
Why are they celebrating?
You know, I don't know. Do you have a correspondent there who can ask? I'm here demonstrating against. I'm here demonstrating against U.S. imperialism and the U.S. intervention.
Is this AI though? These images of everybody
I don't know.
celebrating?
You're the one showing me the video, so let me know. You're showing me the source.
I don't know. I don't think it's AI because it's
Okay.
being published by multiple news organizations. So just what are your thoughts on it?
I'm here protesting U.S. intervention,
I understand that. I
U.S.
get that.
imperialism, and U.S. capitalism.
God, you can almost smell him from here. Thanks to the Nate Friedman Show for that clip. But all right, this is the moment of exaltation, and yes, let's enjoy it. But of course, the big serious question, as always, is what comes next. Donald Trump and his Secretary of State Marco Rubio will quite rightly be judged swiftly on whether they leave Venezuela an independent, prosperous democracy once again after this strike, or if they see it swap one dictator for another. Now, the Trump administration has taken a huge gamble here, but you know what? It is one that I think is worthwhile, not just for the Venezuelan people, but also for world peace. And that's why I think it is important to note that as bad as Maduro's involvement in the drug trade, which was the proximate excuse for the raid, might be, the real key to what's happened here is that Venezuela, which sits just on the other side of the Caribbean Sea from the U.S., was becoming increasingly tight with Iran, Russia, and China, as well as the broader so-called anti-Western BRICS alliance of third world countries. The real reason the U.S. wanted Maduro gone was that he was increasingly tying Venezuela to dictatorships and rivals like Iran, Russia, and China, which, despite sanctions, were buying Venezuela's oil and providing military aid. In other words, Maduro was giving all sorts of bad actors a base on the U.S.'s doorstep. Trump finally said enough, as did his Secretary of State Marco Rubio, shooting down claims that all of this military action was just about oil in an interview with the American news program Meet the Press.
Need to take over the Venezuelan oil industry?
Well, we don't need to. First of all, let me go back up. We don't need Venezuela's oil. We have plenty of oil in the United States. What we're not going to allow is for the oil industry in Venezuela to be controlled by adversaries of the United States. You have to understand, why does China need their oil? Why does Russia need their oil? Why does Iran need their oil? They're not even in this continent. This is the Western Hemisphere. This is where we live. And we're not going to allow the Western Hemisphere to be a base of operation for adversaries, competitors, and rivals of the United States.
Have specific
Now, anti-Trump commentators and protesters may not get this fact, but Rubio is simply saying what ordinary Venezuelans also have been saying on the streets.
Y le pido a todos que tengan fe. No sé dónde iré a salir, pero le pido a todos que tengan fe, que no se dejen llenar la cabeza de que los gringos solo quieren el petróleo, y los gringos solo quieren sus riquezas. O sea, y a esas personas les pregunto, ¿qué creen ellos que querían los rusos y los chinos durante tanto tiempo? ¿La receta de la arepa?
That's right, they weren't there for the recipes. And in the cold realpolitik of power, you would rather be tied to the U.S. than Russia or China. So the big question now, of course, is where does all of this go? Well, what's happened here is, of course, bad for countries like China, which loses a source of oil, as well as Iran and Russia, who have lost a geostrategic partner on America's doorstep. Indeed, Maduro's fall also comes amid a wave of freedom breaking out in the Middle East, with the Ayatollah's regime in Iran said to be on the ropes, even reportedly now mulling over a plan to fly the mullahs out to Moscow if things get too hot. But in the meantime, the Trump administration says they are going to control Venezuela, but with Maduro's vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, technically at the helm. Now, I am told that the plan right now is to keep Rodriguez normally in control to keep the country from spiraling into chaos in preparation for later elections. That is to say, Rodriguez is a tool of control, not the center of power. Now, this is a big bet, but as the disastrous aftermath of the overthrow of Saddam Hussein showed, not having a plan for day two after this sort of military action is a recipe for failure. Yet there is something else that I think is just as true. Despite all the caterwauling of those who claim that this was a violation of international law, whatever that is, and that Maduro should never have been touched, well, I have to ask the question, what is the alternative? I mean, this is the question I can never get a straight answer to from any of these international law types, unless their answer is that we are to let the West continue to be hamstrung by its own rules, which it forces itself to obey, at the same time losing power and influence and control all the while, when the only thing our enemies and adversaries and rivals understand is force.